fabulous co-host, George Christie, who is the founder of Wine Industry Network and our industry resource for all of our information, jobs, and everything else, who has a really good pulse on what's happening in the industry as well. And I am also with Nick Goldschmidt, who is an international consultant and a winemaker and a very well-respected member of the wine community, who will also have insightful things to say about what is currently happening in our industry, and you said globally, correct?
Is that what we're talking about?
Yes.
She wouldn't give me the first question. I didn't even know what we're here for.
So Nick is going to give us a global industry, a global industry report. Okay, we're starting with some of my Chardonnays.
Excellent.
This is Selby.
We gotta loosen up here.
2018 Russian River Valley Chardonnay. And let me give you all some wine, and we can toast to another fabulous week in the wine industry.
Cheers.
Cheers.
George. Cheers, Nick.
Cheers.
Another week. Another week.
Yeah, and so today what we're talking about is where the industry currently stands, and we've been through a lot. The entire country has, but we've gone through obviously the fires, we've gone through the pandemic, but there are a lot of interesting developments within the industry, and the good news is that consumption is up, and evidently it's up globally as well. And people are buying more wines, but there have been a lot of shifts in consumer behavior and how people are making decisions, and I think there's a little bit of a fight for the different channels within the wine industry, meaning where you're going to place your wines, but I think the biggest change is probably the direct to consumer. But Nick, let's just start with the big picture, and then we'll come down. We'll narrow down to Healdsburg. Nick does consult.
Great.
In Chile. And
Chile, Argentina, New Zealand, Australia, and Canada.
Okay. So in your international consulting, what do you see happening with winemaking in general? Do you feel like people are increasing production right now?
Well, I think the two big impacts that we've had have been political and then climatic. So political, the tariffs, the Chinese tariffs on the Australian industry has been traumatic. In South Africa, the shutdown of the ability to be able to buy alcohol has been traumatic. And because of the tariffs of French wine coming to the US as well, that's also had an impact. But really, Australia is the one that's been hammered the most. I mean, their sales into China have been diminished by about 90%. And so where does that wine go to? And who is set to take advantage? Of course, that would be Chile and Argentina. The South African situation, I'm not quite sure about, but the inventories in South Africa are certainly building because it's an on-again, off-again ability to be able to sell wines to consumers. They've found that the more people drink, the more COVID spreads, is what I've read. And the changes in the tariffs with French wine coming into the US may be too little too late because people have kind of moved on. So I think the tariff situation has been really hugely impactful, especially in a country like Chile. Chile has always been known as a country that you can go to for cheap wine, and because of the detriment of the harvest in 2020 in California, a lot of Americans have been going down to Chile and buying in bulk. So Cabernet bulk was about 70 cents a litre in November, and now it's $1.20 in March. And the that's fine short term, but what they're also finding is they can make more money in bottled product by shipping that into China. So the interest to sell bulk into the US is being diminished. In the meantime, where is the US going to get wine from? Because of course 2020 we only harvested, George, you'll remember, 3.2 million tons instead of 4.1 million that we'd harvested the year before. So a shortage of 1 million tons. So where are we going to get wine?
And what Nick's referring to, I mean, things that are obvious to us, with the fires, primarily. I mean, our harvest numbers were way down because of the spread of fires.
I think the fires in the US were nothing compared to the frost damage that we had in New Zealand. So New Zealand, you will
So there are a
certainly
lot of
see.
international things happening at once.
You'll certainly see, if you like New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you should buy it now. Basically, the crop of 21 vintage was 50% of last year. And the bulk price has gone from $3.50 a litre to $7 a litre.
Wow.
So basically, you're talking about double price. I'm already taking orders for 2022 now
On your
on my
New
Sauvignon
Zealand
Blanc in
Sauvignon
New
Blanc?
Zealand. Yeah.
I want to go back to a comment you made so that people don't panic a little bit. Nick made a comment that there was a general belief that drinking alcohol spread COVID. And what he is referring to is there was a general thought process in South Africa that would happen, correct? And
Yes.
so they did prohibit alcohol consumption.
Social distancing became an
Yes,
issue
but-
when people drank.
But
Not
we
that
we're not.
wine was spreading COVID. You are correct.
Okay,
Thank you.
let's be
Thank you
completely
for-
clear on that. But
I
did
want to
they?
be clear that the fires are not. Look,
Okay.
we have botrytis, we have frost, we have powdery mildew, we have sunburn,
Okay,
we have
so
drought.
you're saying it was a tough year and fires were one component
Correct.
of the fact that our harvest is down or was down in
Yeah.
2021.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is because people don't understand fires. Well, I mean, I garnered most of my experience in Canada, where we, unfortunately, we have we witness more fires in Canada and Australia and Chile than we do in California. So my experience was such, but I didn't, because of the earliness of the fires in California. What I knew helped, but not as much as I hoped it would help.
Your knowledge of
My
how
knowledge
to
and
handle
particularly
fires.
the analysis.
Well-
I learned a lot about analysis this year, more than I wanted to.
Yeah.
I can attest to that. Nick moderated a panel that we put together at Wine Industry Network to talk about the smoke impact, and it was incredibly interesting that the things that he had learned was Nick had a couple of basically scientists another winemaker, and while they went through so much and they learned so much, I think his parting comment was like something along the lines of like, now we're just starting to learn how much we don't know,
Right.
and that they're more confused than ever. But it was
Yeah, we're
really
confused at a high level.
Yeah.
Well, and I also want to comment to you, George. You also are a partner in a winery, so
Small
you're
brand.
a small brand called Cyanea, which is small and fabulous, and we're actually going to open your wine shortly. But you also feel the impact as a winery owner and the owner of a vineyard. Nick owns vineyards as well. You're sort of getting hit on both sides
Yeah.
in the micro world
Yeah.
when there's a fire.
Yeah. Well, my partners are farmers, and it was in Dry Creek Valley, which was tremendous impact in Dry Creek Valley, and so there was I couldn't tell you how many tons that they couldn't harvest, but it was not insignificant. And then of course, just like every other tasting room in the area, the fires scared people away for a couple the last few years, and then on top of COVID, so it's been very challenging. But we're coming out of it. We're emerging.
Yeah, no, I mean, certainly come and visit Dry Creek Valley. We're all on.
Yeah.
We're back to normal.
We're back.
Well, there's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
But again, to your global comments, there's been a lot happening internationally in different
Yeah, I think
regions that has impacted the entire world of wine.
it's almost like, I was thinking about this, it's almost like the seasons are becoming shorter. So the frost that devastated New Zealand's harvest was a very late frost. And it was and this is not unusual. In Marlborough, it's like every helicopter in New Zealand is in Marlborough for a period of about 2 weeks. But the problem was the helicopter
And the
noise.
helicopter is there because
We're trying to convert the inversion layer, and the problem is the inversion layer
it's to prevent frost from happening.
is to keep the air moving. Yeah.
Yes, yes.
So the problem was the
I know
inversion
that.
layer is too high.
Oh.
So the helicopters
So the level the helicopters had to fly was
too high, and so they couldn't protect the grapes because the frost was so severe. And we haven't had a frost like that since 2003.
Do they use fans as well?
No. useless.
Just helicopters?
Helicopters are the way to go.
So when you come to wine country, you'll see vineyards with fans, and the fans will do frost protection. That's crazy. They can only use helicopters in New Zealand?
Pretty much. I mean, it's the traditional way. We use movable fires, which is another crazy thing. You put a big heater on the back of the tractor and drive it around. Or what we do is we plant shelter belts with a gap in it, and then the cold air funnels, it actually forms a vacuum and actually goes through the gap in the trees. But you always sacrifice the vines obviously near the gap because they get burnt. But which is quite different to what we do in Australia. In Australia we get frost, but it's less impactful because in Australia we have more airflow generally. There's not too much flat land, and so using fans etc. can help that. But in Marlborough you're talking about a valley and it's very, very flat.
Well, frost, I would assume, is the biggest global damaging factor.
Well, apparently we just had it in
vineyards.
France, right?
Yeah, that's devastating. That is so
Champagne
sad.
and France. But we also had, not this year, but in prior years in the Okanagan Valley, we've also had early frost, meaning in New Zealand, I was talking about late frost. When we get late frost, when you get bud push and you get frost then, that's bad. But in the Okanagan Valley, we've been getting frost earlier, meaning that not always the fruit had been picked and we had a frost. So in 2019, we had a pretty significant frost early. And those who had not done correct canopy management, who had not been on top of their vineyards per se, got hammered. And for us, luckily, we spent a lot of time and energy getting the shoots into vertical positions because it's a edgy climate. I mean, it's not we're talking about 40 degrees, so we're along latitude, so it's going to be cold. So we know we've got a short season, so we have to spend a lot more time and energy in the vineyard making sure that it's going to work for that particular region. We just haven't been impacted that much here in California because we've always had this, beautiful,
perfect
ripening. And that's why, to be honest, that's why I live in California. But with shortages of water going forward, we're going to have to do a lot more work in the vineyard to control the amount of vigor, maybe change the way we prune. I can see us moving more to cane pruning than spur pruning because we need less water. I can see us farming for smaller vines, shorter canopies, to try and...
So in general, any method of farming that leads to less water usage.
Correct, but also getting the shoots vertical. We too often in California, the shoots are like this, and that just causes humidity issues and uses more water because we've got more leaves per shoot. When we're like this, we know the industry standard is 13 leaves per shoot, 2 clusters per cane, that's and 15 buds per meter. That's the global standard. But when you take that shoot and you lay it down, you've got a lot more leaves on, it's not being tipped, etc. So you use more water. So I think because I'm being general here, but I think because we've lived in such an ideal climate, we've become a little bit sloppy in the way that we farm, and I think we're getting punished now that we're going to need to do a better job.
Well, they didn't have the foresight because people planted not knowing, of course, what was going to happen in the future.
Yeah, but if you look at the old Italians, the way they planted was, head prunes in this big. Remember, we only had irrigation in the 60s. I mean, that's relatively new concept. So they didn't have irrigation, so they'd do this head pruning. The vines are about this tall, and they would, when we say head pruning, they would prune all the way back to the head, leaving about 10 buds, 15 buds, and then those canes would just grow and uses much less water, smaller crop, in some respects better quality perhaps. And then we discovered irrigation, then we discovered posts and wire, and we trained everything up, and now we've got these big monster rootstocks that don't need as much water. So we've got these big powerful vines that, and then we started planting on more marginal soils with a little bit more clay or a little bit more free-running soils, stony soils. Boom, suddenly we need more water, And now it's almost like we're coming back to the history. We're coming back to the way the Italians used to farm. And I think it's happening throughout the world. You know, people, you can say in the winery too. You know, I walked into a winery 10 years ago in Argentina. I saw 50 basket presses from the 1800s. At that time, we thought basket presses were cool. Like, dude, they've been using them around the world for, you know, close to 150 years. You know, it's like, oh, making wine in concrete. My first vintage was 1982. I hadn't even seen a wood barrel. We were only making wine in concrete in 1982.
Yeah.
So so things come full circle.
Yeah, it's the same in vineyards.
It's interesting. Yeah, the basket press isn't a sculpture anymore. It's back in the winery being utilized.
True.
Well, it's funny, Nick what Nick was talking about, just kind of going back to the growing seasons getting shorter, and kind of from the bigger picture, just climate change in general. And this last week we hosted, along with an organization out of Italy called Vinidia, a technical conference called Enoform, and the premier sponsor is an association called OIV, which is an international association that supports research right across the globe. It's funded by it's a government funded, many different governments across. You know, I don't know how many countries support OIV, but the point that I wanted to make, which was kind of in line with what Nick was saying, the president CEO of OIV opened up the conference, and his main point was talking about in terms of the biggest challenge facing our industry is climate change and the adjustments that we're going to need to make to go forward. So how we irrigate, how we prune, how we train the vines. I mean, it's just things that we're going to have to do because the climate is not the same as it was. And Nick, I mean, since you started, right? I mean, how different is it now than it was even 10 years ago, right? It must be very different out there.
Well, the OIV is a very interesting organization. We don't really talk about it in the US. The ex-president of the OIV, who actually worked at CME with me, but because we're Americans,
right?
You know,
Nice.
we don't. I'm a goddamn American. Look,
He is.
I've lived here 30 villages.
And I don't know, Nick's from New Zealand, but he does have a passport, and he loves California.
I lived here more than half my life. So we choose. Well, we listen to what the OIV says, but because we don't export a lot, the OIV doesn't really have that big an impact. But I think they're extremely smart people. Yeah. German, French based.
But it does show that internationally everybody has the same concern about climate change. And that's obviously.
I don't know that they.
Some people are like this though.
Yeah.
Because they're embracing. You know, when I talk to Canadians or, you know, I went to Chile in Chile, which is you know, at the bottom end of the world. You know, I'm at the 42nd parallel. It's further south than Tasmania, not as far south as Central Otago in New Zealand, but a long way south. And these guys are going, man, bring on the global warming. We're going to be able to plant grapes down here. We're not going to need to irrigate because we've got plenty of rainfall. And then they realize they are getting impacted because the season's becoming shorter. Because I have a vineyard in Moyeco, which is about 12 hours south of Santiago in Chile, and yeah, we got hit by frost. We don't normally get hit by frost because we've got this maritime climate and we get rain and we get protected, but suddenly we're getting frost and short crops, and so even the outer limits of grape growing now are being affected.
The world.
Yeah.
I'm going to interrupt you for a moment to have you tell us about this wine. And can you tell us a little bit about the winery too?
So yeah, Cyanea Vineyards. I'm partners with the Cyanea family. They are fifth generation farming family here in Sonoma County. They farm about 300 acres in Dry Creek Valley and Alexander Valley. And the Cyanea Vineyards program is really focused on the Dry Creek fruit. And of course, Dry Creek Valley is well known for its Zinfandel. And they have some of the nicest old vine blocks really left in Dry Creek Valley up on the benchland that Mike's the son and John's the father. And, some of these put this in, and I remember being out here with my grandfather and my cousin Gene, and we were, and just so cool to be part of this heritage, but they're just, great farmers. We make a little bit of wine, a little over 1,000 cases a year. This one in particular is called the Olive Block. It's a block that is named after a couple of big old olive trees. That's how they name, they like Olive Block because there's a couple of big olive trees out there. But it's just, it's a lot of fun, and we got a little tasting room out there, and just kind of doing. It's interesting because we just started making wine together in 2008, so they've been farming for over 100 years, and it's just sort of, most of the old farming families are out of the wine business now,
True.
We just had another couple of winery closures this week. One of them is Sebastiani. They closed Sebastiani Winery in so another old Italian family that
That
crazy.
surprised me. Were you a little surprised by that? Well, just things are changing right now.
Really, I think. I mean, if you look at the way we farm in Sonoma County, I mean, that's why I've got dirt on my shoes today. We're putting in irrigation.
Actually, both of you have dirt on your shoes. I'm wearing flip-flops.
No, but I mean, if you look at the vineyards in Napa Valley, 80% of the vineyards are owned by wineries. And if you look at the vineyards in Sonoma County, only 20% of the vineyards are owned by wineries. And I think if you understand that concept, this is why people should come and visit Sonoma County, because you can stop, walk into a vineyard, and the owner will come and talk to you. You just don't, I remember that in France.
I hope they're interesting, of course.
Yeah, and I hope they invite you in and have a glass of wine and a piece of cheese or whatever. Well, I remember that in France and Germany, and certainly New Zealand. If you stop, I mean, people will come out and talk to you. Whereas in Napa, it's going to be different because they're owned by wineries. So, and then you take. We didn't talk about the consolidation of distribution that certainly happened during COVID. That in 1990 when I started at CMU.
And you're talking about, I'm just bringing it. You're talking about the big distributors are getting bigger, and the small distributors are
not necessarily. I just think that in 1990 there was 4,500 distributors selling wine across the US, and now there's less than 1,000. And so the constriction, the funnel, if you imagine the funnel, is becoming very small for wineries to get through the three-tier system. And this is why during COVID the direct-to-consumer business has taken off, because a lot of those small brands were not able to get into the market.
So yes, it's harder to get national distribution, and so there needs to be a bigger focus on selling directly to the consumer.
So and we know what the future is, because all we got to do is look at France, Germany, Italy, and it's farm to gate or negociant. So you have to choose. This is why coming to wine country is so important.
Farm to gate.
Like, you grow the grapes, you make the wine, you sell the wine. And that's because of the constriction of distribution. That could be a future for many of these smaller wineries. If you're caught in the middle, like George just alluded to, Sebastiani, and there's another big winery that unfortunately closed this week too, that this is you're caught in the middle, it's a problem.
Yeah.
Well, and during COVID, the channels were very, very limited. So people who are distributing nationally.
Well, wineries that were overly reliant on, let's say, like on-premise, so like restaurant business, just disappeared. It just completely disappeared. So they had to make adjustments. But I think that COVID did bring out a lot of resourcefulness and a lot of innovation that we saw in how some of these smaller wineries were able to get their wines moved, with the virtual tastings and some of the other things that they did, home deliveries, and it was pretty impressive.
Yeah, jumping to the occasion, full digital movement and e-commerce and everything else. Yes, I certainly.
I think though that
jumped in that pool.
When something happens, it's the opposite attracts. So what I'm seeing is a resurgence in new national marketing companies, and these companies are willing to take on other brands or create other brands to find an alternative to, to get back into the restaurant business, so they're not just selling the same old stuff. You don't want to go into a restaurant and order something that you could buy down at Safeway or somewhere else. You want something. When I go for dinner, I try to order something on the menu I can't pronounce, and I buy a bottle of wine of something I've never seen before. I don't. If I want to drink something that I can go to the supermarket and buy, it's not interesting for me. I can do that at home. Why would I come out for dinner and drink something and eat something that I can do at home?
Well, and that was another thing that happened during COVID, is so many people were at home and cooking at home, and I think there's a lot more experimentation with wine taking place. I think it was helpful for smaller brands that you can't pronounce.
I can pronounce Cyanea. Good zin, man. I really liked it.
Thank you.
Silky, brown. I can have 2 glasses, obviously. Which is hard with zin. Trying to keep the alcohol in check while maintaining the acidity.
The goal that I started, as I mentioned earlier, I've always been involved in the business in Dry Creek Valley. It's kind of where I started, and I'm still involved. And so Zinfandel's always been the grape, the primary grape, most best known grape from Dry Creek. But Zinfandel's always, I felt like, and probably because I have a little chip on my shoulder, right, as being a Dry Creek, think of myself as a Dry Creek guy, as sort of not being the white tablecloth wine, right? You're thinking about your Cabs or back in the day Merlots or certain Pinots. And so when we talk about the Zins at Cyanea, I was just like, I want a style that I call like a white tablecloth style, something that feels a little more elegant than just punching, in the nose Zinfandel, which I think there's a lot of those out there, which for me can be a bit much. So that's what we try to go for. And,
and it's got a lot of broad food pairing capabilities.
Yeah, we have a few different old vine blocks. We actually do a couple of different old vine blocks, and we released an old vine Carignan, which is kind of fun. I should have brought that next time I'll bring that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, just to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah, I love Carignan. It's funny, I would say Zin drinkers aren't like normal people because they really choose Zin over everything. They're very loyal.
They're very loyal.
I love it.
Yeah.
We love our Zin drinkers, but Zin always comes first.
Yeah.
So
I think also people think Dry Creek is a hot climate, like one of the hottest climate. But I live in Dry Creek, and I can't grow Zin. It's too cold where I live.
You live at the cool end.
Yeah, I live in the cool end.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, so for me, Zinfandel and Dry Creek starts about halfway down,
Right. Yeah, it's fun. Fog burns off. You could be in Dry Creek, plugged in, and to the other, it's like blue sky. It's not that, and you're 10 miles, right? So it's not that deep.
Yeah. Cool.
Although I think it's impressive. I think a lot of people don't realize that the regions are there for a reason. Like Russian River, Chardonnay, Pinot. It is because of the fog belt and the marine layer. I mean, it's all a planned situation. It's not random at all.
No.
This is delicious. It's very good.
Well, good family too. So.
Yeah. Very authentic.
Did the Cyaneas change any of their marketing during COVID, since they had to close the tasting room? And
well,
your company?
The tasting room had just opened up, so we didn't have a lot to change because we were just getting started. So it was a little bit frustrating, and just getting a tasting room in general is very challenging with all of the hoops that you need to jump through, to get your permits and dealing with the county, etc. I can't say that we made a lot of changes because, like I said, we didn't have a lot of history, but we certainly made our adjustments. And my partner's wife Laura Cyanea, who runs the tasting room, did a great job, and it was just a great big hustle really out there for everybody. But now it's like I said, as things are starting to open up, we're certainly seeing a lot more traffic out there, and looking forward to what's to come.
People are excited about getting out.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, there's no question about it.
No question about it. I'm excited.
I know.
We're all excited, right?
I know. Okay. We are now tasting Nick's wine, which is called Goldschmidt Vineyards Plus.
Yeoman. So Yeoman is my top vineyard in the Alexander Valley, and I just make 75 to 100 cases of this in any year because it's so hard to make. And this is the 2016, which is our current release. I always release it a lot older because of the technique that I use, and so
Barrel aging?
no, not the barrel aging. It's the way I increase the volatile acidity, so I get the wild bacteria to blow up. It's a complicated situation.
Interesting.
But basically, it takes I take the vineyard, and I take the two outside rows of the vineyard because the outside rows don't have any competition, and so they're more vigorous, and basically they undercrop. So they have too much canopy and a small crop because they don't have competition. They get more water. They got more fruiting area for the vine to grow in, and so you end up with these big powerful vines. So I pick them separately, and then there's many fermentations that occur in wine. We always talk about fermenting sugar to alcohol, which is the obvious one, and we talk about fermenting malic acid to lactic acid, which is also fermentation, but it's a bacteria fermentation rather than the yeast. And then there's two spoilage fermentations that occur. One's called Brettanomyces, which is another yeast that ferments the fructose, which is the last sugar that's left. It's hard to ferment. I don't like that. It gives a barnyardy, earthy, and for me a metallic taste. I pick that up quite a lot in some regions of the world. But there's another really cool fermentation. It's Lactobacillus or Pediococcus or Eniococcus, which is a bacteria that ferments other substrates into what we know as ethyl acetate or acetic acid. So acetic acid is vinegar, ethyl acetate is nail polish remover. I see it in every wine. It's subliminal and it adds to complexity. But if you can get that reaction to occur in the first 3 months of the wine's life, and I learned this technique from a very famous Australian winery when I worked down in Australia. At the end of 3 years of barrel aging, you get this hugely licorice complexity that gives, and you still get all the acidity.
You induce this.
I encourage it. I don't induce it.
it.
Yeah. So I don't stop it from happening. Whereas most of my other wines, I stop it from happening. But I make it happen in the first 3 months. And so at the end of the 3 years, you get this huge complexity. And if I let it go, as I typically would after 3-4 years, I'll smell the ethyl acetate or the acetic acid. But you don't see it in this wine. And that's why I make 5 or 6 barrels a year, but I only choose 3 or 4 to actually bottle. And so this is our most expensive wine that we make in the Alexander Valley, and it's a very old vineyard. It's an old terraced vineyard for those that know the Red Winery Road and Geysers Road, it's right there. And I've been making wine there since 1990. So this is
delicious.
26 years I've been making wine on this vineyard.
It's really good. You know, Nick, the audience a little bit about, you talked about the outside vines and not having any competition and really pushing more of a green growth than throwing energy into the fruit. Because sometimes I try to explain, people go like, well, why would the grapes be better on this rocky hillside that looks like they're struggling? I would never plant my vegetable garden there, but you tell me that's the best place to grow grapes. Help me understand it. And if you could because I don't think people quite connect the dots, right?
That's a very difficult question.
Come on.
I mean, it's oh man, because it's all relative. It depends on the rootstock, the variety, the row direction, the aspect, the latitude.
Well,
I mean,
it's
such a complicated.
Generally
question.
speaking, the more stressed that the vines are, right, they tend to throw more energy into the fruit. Is that maybe too general of a?
That's true, but then you can, if the vine is too stressed, you end up with the other problem, which is the berry size is really important. I mean, the berries here, because of the way we grow it on this gravelly loam, these berries are about 0.85 grams.
Right.
Okay, a typical Cabernet berry is about 1 gram. So you can imagine the skin to pulp ratio on a thin soil is smaller. So you get more colour, more tannin, more acidity, right? when you have a bigger berry, it's less concentrated, and if you have Merlot, which normally weighs about 1.2 grams, it's a bigger berry. So you've got to grow Merlot on a more clay site,
Right.
because you want more water holding capacity. And I learned all that because of Cyanea in Chile, because that's a late variety too. But this, to me, I don't want to stress the vines that much. I don't
There's
want
a balance.
I want to have a balance.
There's a balance, right? Of like wanting to, you don't want to
Yeah,
go
George,
too
you
much.
should have asked me that question before we got on here. That's a very tough question. I can't
So you're not
answer
going to answer it.
I can't. It depends on
You
so
can't
many
say
things that would
it's-
send everybody to sleep.
That's already happened.
He's like a scientist.
Yeah.
Nick's like a scientist.
Well, plus, what's this crazy use of the metric system? What's that all about?
The rest of the world has moved on.
Teasing
We
him.
talked
I
about the
know.
OIV. The OIV is only metric.
I'm
Yeah.
just joking around. So you're not going to say
No, but I'll have another glass of wine and think about it.
Yeah.
that more stressed vines can.
No, I don't agree with that. I don't think more stress vines produce better wine. It's pretty interesting when I go to a vineyard and when I was running Allied de Mec, we found a great vineyard. So I would take 3 or 4 winemakers from that region. This is why George is nodding his head because he was at Allied de Mec, which was a big company in California and disappeared in 2008. So I'd take a bunch of winemakers to a vineyard, and some winemakers would say, I want the top of the hill, I want the full exposure, I want the free draining soil. Some guys want, no, I don't think I can make good wine from there. I want the bottom of the hill where I can crop it heavily and I can make, it's going to be better value for money. And then you got the other guys going, this is more like me, I want the Piedmont, I want the middle of the vineyard, because, it's like Goldilocks, right? It's not too hot, not too cold, it's just right.
That reminds me of one of the first tastings I did when it was all Allied Domec and Beam Wine Estates came together. I was part of the marketing team, and so I got to go to this big tasting with all the entire winemaking team. And I was as nervous as could be, right? Because we're all supposed to rate our wines, and it was just like, and then we had to share our scores, right? And I was just like, oh my God, this is ridiculous. Because you just feel like you know nothing, right? Because you just sitting here with Nick now, you kind of like can imagine how overwhelmed and intimidated I was. But the greatest thing was, and all the wines were good. It was a great portfolio. And when we went through and started scoring the wines, they were all over the board. Something that he might love. One of the other great winemakers was maybe their least favorite wine. You know what I mean? And what it did for me was made me feel not so intimidated when I was with the winemaking team, but more importantly, it really is just about what you like. And even when like Nick's talking about like when those winemakers making decisions on which grapes they want, with the grapes that
Yeah, well, I mean, that brings up a really good, like people talk about terroir. Well, I think there are 2 reasons why terroir doesn't exist. Number one, we invented irrigation. Okay, so we changed the soil by adding irrigation.
Right.
Number 2, I won't tell you which company or which winemakers, but I made a picking decision for 5 winemakers, and we went into this vineyard, and they pick in rows of 4. When we're hand harvesting, we pick in sets of 4 rows. I took 5 winemakers and I gave them 10 tons each, randomly picked across this vineyard, and sent the wines to them. A year later, we sat down with the 5 winemakers and the 5 wines from the same vineyard, completely mixed rows, etc. And guess what? They all tasted different. One of them was undrinkable. The other 4 were just vastly different. So does terroir really exist? I think it exists in the personality of the winemaker. If I owned the vineyard and I farmed it and I made the wine, I think terroir exists. But if I go into a random vineyard and buy the grapes and make them, you know what? It depends on how he farmed it or how much he irrigated, whatever. But so this term terroir, and it's used internationally, as we know, I think it really depends on those things and doesn't really exist as we mean it to be. What do you think, George?
I'm thinking about it now because you know what?
Because you gave me a tough question, I'm giving you one.
So it's tough to argue with that because you're right. The tools that we have, when the term the terroir came, really probably originated, they didn't have the the tools that we have now, right? It's not just the irrigation, but the different types of fertilizers and additions that we can make to the soils, right? Whether they're, regardless of how they're applied, the trellising systems and things of that nature that we have. So the tools are very different. You can't get away from some of the things that we have. The climate doesn't change.
I'm just going to disagree with both of you.
What?
I think it exists. I mean, you're sort of knocking the romance of the industry a little bit.
No, the romance of the industry is the culture of the person. It's the culture of the person.
Still, there's an influence in the environment of a vineyard on the grapes itself. I've shared vineyards with people before, and I have had different outcomes.
Okay, I don't like Grüne Veltliner. I went to Italy. I went to Austria. I sat in restaurants. I ate Wiener Schnitzel every night, and I drank every Gruner I could find. Fantastic, best wines I'd ever had. I couldn't believe I'd been missing out all my life. I came back to California, went to the store, bought a bottle of Gruner, went home, same result. Didn't like it.
It's
about where you are and the people and the culture. And
it's like bringing Grape from Italy.
No, but I always say, no one has ever had a bad barrel sample. You take 100 people off the Healdsburg Square, and Nick walks them through the barrel room, and he starts doing barrel samples. They're in love. Cool. They're going to love the next one better. Everyone they're going to love a little bit better than the last one they've had. So part of it is a little bit of that's funny.
Okay, go back to your story then, Susie.
I'm just saying.
I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, absolutely not. What other myths can you debunk here?
I know.
Surely there's.
No, but I think the global climate uncertainty is at least being talked about, and that's more than. There's a very famous viticulturalist, you can Google, his name is Richard Smart, Dr. Richard Smart. He's Australian, he went to New Zealand and created the Teakwater two-tier trellis and all these other trellises, the Smart Dyson, etc. And you know what? I didn't believe in what he was saying, but you know what? He made me go and look. And that, I think this whole conversation about climate is, you know what? I'm noticing. I've got 3 weather apps on my cell phone. I mean, I never used to have that. And I'm monitoring powdery mildew pressure. I'm looking at flowering. I'm really recording the dates a lot more thoroughly as we go for through the points, the flowering, the set, etc. I'm going to be monitoring those dates a lot more intensely than I ever used to. And so suddenly I realised, hey, we're a month ahead of normal. I mean, 10 years ago, I wouldn't have even bothered. I'm like, hey, dude, it's looking a little pretty early, isn't it? Right. But now I know it is early because I'm watching and I'm monitoring, and I think that's what global uncertainty or global change or global warming, whatever we call it, is making people take notice.
What do you think is happening with, I don't think there's a trend toward crop levels, but we certainly are going to have probably a lower crop this year because of the drought, correct? I mean, so wouldn't a factor like that
impact long
term with global warming as well?
The quick answer to that is yes, we are going to have less crop. And when I go into the vineyard, I see one, instead of 2 clusters per shoot, I'm seeing 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, and the second cluster is small. But this year I pruned to 1 bud on some of my blocks. Meaning instead of having a 2-bud spur, I got a 1-bud spur. So now I've got 1 very strong shoot with 2 strong clusters. It's going to need less water, and I think I'm going to have the same or even more crop than people that prune normally.
Why did you do that?
Because I knew it was going to be a drought situation. I knew...
But you did it to conserve water?
I did it to conserve water, and I knew that I was going to have bigger clusters. So I thought ahead, because again, I started listening to people about global warming, and I had all these apps on my phone, and I looked up whether it was a La Nina or an El Nino, and I think a lot of what happens in the northern hemisphere has already been done in the southern hemisphere. So I watched the southern hemisphere climate. I watched the ocean temperature of Santiago versus the ocean temperature of Seattle, and I knew the ocean temperature in Santiago was warmer by 2 degrees. And so we've seen it this year already that the ocean temperature in Seattle is 3 degrees warmer than normal. So I know we're going to have more humidity up there, and we're going to have warmer temperature here, and sure enough, it's happened.
So that's really interesting, Nick, because it's like, so would you say, is it safe to say, like, as you've evolved as a winemaker, that you're sort of shifting, you're still going by gut, right? You're still out there tasting berries and doing, but now you're collecting more data than you did 20 years ago, right? I mean, you're like a little bit more scientific about it.
Yeah, but it's what you said earlier, George. I mean, when we're talking about smoke, yeah, I'm confused, but at a higher level. I mean, and data dyslexia does occur.
Yeah.
You know, how much information can I pound into my older and older brain to make me think forward? I don't know. I honestly think these are really super exciting times in the wine industry.
Yeah.
And the quality of wine is... I thought that, you know, if you graph quality against input, energy, time, everything, you know, that we do physically, I thought the curve was like this, and we were leveling off. But now, I think with the extra energy and emphasis that I'm seeing from around the world, not just in the US, I think the quality of wine going forward is nothing but increased.
Yeah.
And do you think the quality-price ratio is going to...
Well, I think $7 and under is not going to exist for a start.
Well,
and I think we're going to be lucky to have $10 and under. I think the quality price, that's a tough one, Susie. I don't know.
What do you so you think that eventually we won't have less expensive wines, correct?
Oh, no, that's impossible. I mean, no, because I'm better off growing marijuana or lettuces or carrots. I can't get the same return. I mean, the return on an acre of grapes is 30,000. It doesn't... no. I mean, a return on four crops of marijuana in a glasshouse situation is $1 million. Why would you grow grapes?
Well, that's a whole other topic, right? That
Cherries.
Yeah. So, I don't know. I mean, I think that there's always people that are going to find a way to fill that niche of those. Well, the first thing let me say, I agree 100% with Nick. I think quality of wines, it just continues to get better and better. And if you want to be in the wine business, and you think, you know, like, you know, I've talked to these people. I've had so many of these conversations. Like, you know, why do you think you're going to be some wine? Because my wines are really good. I'm like, oh my God, that's like everybody's wines are really good.
Yeah.
But which is great for the consumer. I think that there's always going to be those value wines available. They just may not come from California grapes. You know, they may come from like imported bulk wines or something like that. I don't know. I mean,
Well, I think Susie's a great... I mean, Susie, you're a small, entrepreneurial... You know, you've had hard times with the distribution. We talked about that. I mean, what changes are you making in your company in accordance with climatic change or more adversity? What are you doing?
Well, because I purchase all my grapes, I'm not at the mercy of growers necessarily, but I certainly work more closely with them now. You know, I used to be a little bit more casual about...
And what are you talking to the growers about, though?
Well...
You mentioned crop load. Is that something that you're talking to them about? Or
Yes, I discuss crop load, but right now, you know, we always have supply and demand issues. And right now, the growers are in a good position because we had the fires last year. And so grapes are in high demand this year. And when grapes are in higher demand, even though most growers are very encouraging about working with you, they still have to look out for their best interests because they didn't, you know, it always goes back and forth.
So you're going to crush more grapes this year or less grapes than last year? I mean, sorry,
Well, a lot
eliminate last year,
more.
2019.
Probably more. So, but we also went through a couple of years of gluts on the market. You know, and I've read, who knows if it's true, you know, basically they were saying that all we need is one good harvest and then we'll have a glut on the bulk market again. I just find that a little bit hard to believe.
In which country?
In the United States.
In the United States.
But, you know, the point is there's always supply and demand issues that go back and forth.
It's amazing, eh? I mean, who thought that suddenly, okay, we all panicked because we had this pandemic. So we thought, how are we going to sell our wine? And then suddenly the government puts tariffs on French wine. So suddenly, a lot of importers were struggling with volume. Sorry, Susie's plane's coming to pick her up. So who knew that was going to happen? And who knew that China was going to put tariffs on Australia, and suddenly China opens up as an opportunity for export? I mean, you never know. These are things that are unconceivable that we had no. I mean, that wasn't even on my plan.
Yeah.
That.
Well, it's odd when you go from farming issues to political issues.
Yeah.
It's all
So
one big.
politics and climate.
Mm-hmm.
We talk about politics and sports. Now we're talking about politics and climate.
Yeah.
Did you change the way you were selling wine this year?
Absolutely.
And what did you do?
I called friends that had wanted to do business with me for a number of years, and suddenly I'm doing business with them.
Yeah.
You mean for sales and
Yeah,
you're doing more,
distribution-wise.
and you're doing more direct to consumer?
I wish. Well, like George said, we opened a tasting room in Dry Creek
that's right,
in
you built
February
that.
of 2020.
Yeah.
Like, man, we had a really good sales in February, and then we've spent the last year just dropping money into the tasting room. So our tasting room is, just after you guys, just after Cyaneas, and at the poorhouse, it's called. But yeah,
And
I
you
would
have
love.
a great tasting room, by the way. The Goldschmidt tasting room.
Thank you.
You know what Nick does a great job of, though? He's like, I don't know how he does it, because he's bouncing all over the globe, but he is very active with his social media, and he's out in the vineyard telling people what's happening in the vineyard or in the cellar, and he's just, you really, do a great job of creating like an intimate relationship with people that watch your videos. I think it's great. The kids are out there, touring it.
Yeah, the kid, yeah, it's one way to keep them off the streets.
It's great.
You also have a, you're knowledgeable about all aspects. It's really rare for someone who's as knowledgeable about the farming and the winemaking to also be
Amazing.
knowledgeable about the sales channels.
But he does a really good job of, for lack of a better word, just sort of dumbing it down and not coming off as...
He's not doing it today, though.
No, today he's like
Today,
Einstein.
like,
I don't even know what he's
doing that
talking
today.
about. I'm like, what?
I dumbed it down.
But
I knew
yeah,
you were
see,
here.
you need to go lower. You need to go much further.
George, I knew I was speaking to you.
But when he's he just comes across as so approachable and makes it's very good. You do a great job.
Well,
I'm so
thanks.
impressed. all the
I
time.
agree, and is it goldschmidtvineyards.com?
Oh my God! If you want to
If you
join my wine
follow-
club, I would be in love with
Join
you.
the club.
Well, or if you follow your videos, you do actually you do.
Goldschmidt_vineyards on Instagram. So I put a video up every day.
Yeah.
And tomorrow morning I'll put one up about. So we've been digging trenches for. And digging trenches is one thing, but actually looking at the stones that come out of those trenches is so that's what I'm going to post tomorrow. Is the types of stones that came out of the trenches tomorrow.
It's like going to school.
It is.
Just watching
It's
Nick
one of
go to
those-
school.
I find it
know.
interesting.
I'm putting up a golf video tomorrow. I know. Different strengths. But no, you do explain things well.
So the bottom line is I think that we are running maybe not a month early, but certainly 3 weeks early. And I generally like early vintages, which is what 2021 is going to be, barring any other catastrophic event, which is going to be really good for the vine. So even though we're in a drought situation, having a warm vintage is going to work to our advantage in a drought year, because it means that we're going to be able to harvest these grapes sooner, and we're not going to have the stress. If this was a typical vintage where we pick Cabernet at the end of September, October, going into the first week of November, I don't think that's going to happen this year. We're going to be picking Cabernet early mid-September, and I don't think we'll be in November this year. And so it means that we'll use less water, and we'll be ahead of the other harvests around the Sonoma County that take people away. I think everything bears well for 2021 fantastic. I thought about 2020. Unfortunately, the fires disrupted. But the berry size was good, the crop load was good, the health of the canopy was good, and then we had the fires. I think 21 is all of this and more. So even though it's a drought year, I think it's going to be an expensive vintage from a financial standpoint to run a vineyard. But if we break even, it'll be great. But I think the quality is just going to be superb in 21.
Do you feel like do you sell any of your grapes?
No.
None. If you were selling your grapes, do you feel like you would ask?
Sorry, I'm going to sell you 3 tons. I'm going to sell you 3 tons.
Wait a minute.
Well, you can talk to Cyaneas.
Yeah.
That's true. So, do you think it seems like growers are really caring about increasing prices of grapes this year? Is the impression I'm getting from growers. Are you getting that impression?
I don't get involved in a lot of those conversations.
Because their costs are going up, not necessarily because of the fires. And I don't know if that will impact wine prices, but typically it does.
I don't have a lot of those discussions with growers. I'm not out there buying grapes, but as far as like adjusting your prices because you had to pay more for grapes, that's like a different conversation, right? So what will the market demand? So I don't know that they could just say, I paid more for grapes, and
I think clearly the income for growers has decreased.
Yeah.
And I'm not talking about
their costs have gone up.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the US either. I'm talking about my vineyards in New Zealand are more expensive, in Australia and Chile, they're all more expensive to run. And the bottom line is the cost of labour.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Cost of labour, and then because we're largely organic, the cost of fertiliser is incredibly expensive. So because we're using less irrigation, because we're not using weed spray, we're not using Roundup, we're using less fungicides or no fungicides, and so we're just totally relying on copper, which is a natural product, and fertiliser. It's funny how those things suddenly went through the roof. They're quite expensive too, and the price of fuel for running a tractor, and the cost of tractors. It's costing more to farm, and my income as a farmer has decreased.
I know, it's happening across the board.
Yeah. I mean, in New Zealand, for instance, in 2020, we got 18 tonne a hectare, and this year I got 9. My cost was the same, in fact, a little bit more.
Metric.
I just want to confuse the audience so that they don't understand what I'm talking about. So basically I got half the crop, and my costs were more. So 2021 was not a money-maker year in New Zealand, Marlborough, Sauvignon Blanc.
Yeah.
So guess what? The prices will go up.
Okay, so let's end with something positive that's going to happen this year.
Well, bummed out now.
I just said
the prices are going up.
I know we have our final state of the industry comments to make. What I'll say that's positive is that I think the industry in general has remained fluid during this market upheaval, and people really have found, as you said, new ways to sell wine.
Yeah.
And they're still looking for new ways to sell wine, but consumers are also stepping up to the plate, and they are buying more wine online and being extremely supportive of our industry. So that's very good news.
Yeah.
What other good news do we have to share about upcoming 21 harvest?
Oh, I just think
quality
in California, as I said, I think this could be one of the best vintages ever.
Yeah.
I think it's shaping up. I love early vintages. Unfortunately, early vintages often end up being heavy crop. This year is not a heavy crop, so we've got an early vintage, a low crop. I just think the intensity is going to be incredible. And the best news is we're open. Tourists can come to town.
Yeah.
Come and hang with us.
I'm with Dick. I think, with the tourists and just consumers in general, I mean, as we emerge from COVID, I just think there's just this celebratory attitude, right, where people are going to be able to be together and just, really get back to, you don't know what, it's like that cliche of like, you really don't know what you have until it's gone, right? And so we've all miss the opportunity to spend time with the people that we love. And, you know, when that happens, it's like you're drinking wine, right? So I think it's going to be good times for the industry. And we should just buckle up and, you know, enjoy the ride, because it's going to be a good time and a lot of fun.
Definitely. A lot of people are comparing it to the Roaring 20s.
Yeah.
So
I agree with that.
Well, thanks both of you very, very much for being in the Courtyard today. And until next week, enjoy wine and enjoy life.